can I not catch a break in this family? All these family members dying, being assassinated. My husband just every day running our marriage into the ground. Then he kills somebody. Then he abandons that person. It's on my shoulders to fix it. I've had miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage. I'm constantly dumped on by all these people. I'm stressed out continually because his career is on my shoulders, somehow not on his shoulders as he runs through the world. And now I gotta cut my kid's leg off. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise, and today we're going to keep going on in the Joan Kennedy story from Ask Not by Maureen Callahan. This is going to be the second part of what will be a three-part series on Joan. The last time we talked, we were talking about Joan, how she met Ted Kennedy, what their courtship looked like. It was kind of very loose and uncertain, and then suddenly he was proposing, though without a ring. And she found herself ushered into this wedding. She wasn't even really involved in the planning of the wedding. She got to pick out her dress. She could pick out the flowers, but that was about it because old Joe was going to cover the rest of that. And she started to feel like she was being rushed into something that didn't feel like a sure thing because Ted's wandering eye was everywhere but her. And she felt like she was being completely plowed under. So she sent her dad in to have a conference with her future father-in-law, future husband. And their reaction was basically like, she's getting allowed to be a Kennedy, right? So what's the problem? You know? And her dad, so eager was he to unite himself with the Kennedy name that he basically threw Joan under the bus. And we did talk too about the fact that it wasn't all terrible at first. Joan and Ted did have an understanding with each other. She seemed to understand who he was. She didn't seem to have the same expectations for him that his family had. And that was a very calming thing for him, to be with somebody who would allow himself to be who he was without saying, this is the standard. You have to meet this standard. If you don't, we're all going to mock you and shame you. They wanted him to be a politician. He knew he wasn't fit for politics. Joan knew it, but Joan didn't judge him for that. She just wanted him to find his own thing he was good at. And Ted really did enjoy that. And so together, the two of them had kind of cooked up a plan, Let's go to California. Let's go be our own family unit. Let's not always have your mom and dad breathing down our necks, always you being compared with the brothers who are doing something that you don't even want to do. You don't want to be a politician, so why are they forcing you to do it? So it looked for a second like things could work out for Ted and Joan. But then, of course, old Joe sticks his fat nose into it and says, I bought that Senate seat in Massachusetts and Ted's going to take it, And so that was that. And so today we're going to be talking about what did their life look like once Ted was immersed in politics. His career trajectory had already been chosen for him, regardless of his skill or ability. And so now it's all hands on deck to try to get him through this slog. And that means Joan's going to have to participate in his political career because Ted can't carry this on his own. So drag Joan into it. And what's that going to look like for her? And when do things start crumbling for them? Because, of course, before the wedding, it hadn't been good because she knew he was running around. She had also been very fearful that she was going, that she was being plowed under by the family. But once they were married, seemed like things were working. He was still running around with other women, but culturally and where she was socially and economically, that class of people kind of looked the other way. And so she wasn't going to get any help there. But once he took on the mantle of a politician, there really was no room for her whatsoever. She couldn't even dream of a life of them together getting away from the family. Now she truly is enmeshed in the Kennedy machine, and everything that she wants out of life is really nobody's priority. And it's not even really allowed to be her priority either. So, let's get started on Joan. The book says that as Ted's Senate campaign began in the summer of '61, Ted was polling more favorably among women than men. And Joan was a big reason why. Whereas Jackie was cool and aloof with her strange, airy way of talking, Joan was down to earth, riddled with insecurities that any woman could relate to. Reporters loved Joan. Part of it was her kindness, but part of it was her candor. Joan hadn't been media trained. She wasn't fluent in canned sound bites. The very human secrets she let slip. The First Lady wore wigs. The President had an incredibly painful bad back. Those things she said made headlines. Joan really beat herself up over that. Jackie told her it wasn't that big a deal, but Ted was apoplectic. Jack and Jackie were stars. Everybody else's job was to prop them up. "What is wrong with you?" Ted raged. "Are you crazy?" He didn't stand up for her or defend her, nor was he helping her learn how to be a Kennedy wife. She got more advice and compassion from Ethel and Jackie, and that wasn't a lot. Ted was happy to show her off at parties in D.C. or in the pages of women's magazines. Right now, she was his best asset, the woman who domesticated the fast and loose guy once known as Cadillac Eddie. But in private, he was neglecting her, always off on some fact-finding mission in Southeast Asia or some backroom meeting on the Hill. Unless, of course, he needed her. A last-minute call in the afternoon telling her he was bringing 8 or 12 colleagues home for dinner, and she needed to pull off an elegant multi-course dinner. As he would remind her, Jack did the same thing to Jackie all the time before the White House, and she never complained. "Don't embarrass me, Jonesy," he'd say. Ted was kidding. Or was he? Joan would catch a lot of flack from the D.C. doyens over the way she looked, her hair getting blonder and her skirts getting shorter. Women's Wear Daily called her tasteless. A female journalist in the New York Times made note of her miniskirt and yellow tights, disparagingly calling her exotic as a butterfly. Even Cosmopolitan, a magazine branded on women's liberation and sexual freedom, noted her cuddly bosom and adorable bottom. No one wrote about other Kennedy women like that. Cuddly bosom and adorable bottom. Who would describe any human like that? Is she a teddy bear? When she was named the most beautiful woman in D.C. by the Washingtonian, Joan felt objectified, minimized. She wanted people to think she was smart, talented, and had something to offer. Her looks were a quirk of genetics, nothing more. She could hardly take credit for them. Jackie was the intellectual. Ethel, the politico/supermom. Who did that make Joan? The window dressing? Ted told her to brush it off. He was proud of her. He didn't think she should dim her light. He saw her as his best surrogate, even as she doubted that. Her husband's advisors were putting so much pressure on her. It was up to Joan, they said, to prove to voters that Ted wasn't some smart-ass kid, but a serious, thoughtful man of substance. Joan became paralyzed by fear of doing or saying the wrong thing. Every time the phone rang, she was seized with fear. Who would it be? Rose, with her imperious reprovals. Jackie, pretending none of Joan's mistakes bothered her when Joan knew otherwise. Ethel, with one of her backhanded compliments. Or some staffer of Ted's, some middle-aged guy telling her all the things the candidate's wife was doing wrong. Did anybody understand how terrifying it was to be told that you had to be perfect all the time? Some days, Joan was so depressed that she couldn't get out of bed. She'd found herself in a family of ruthless winners, and despite her rising profile, her husband's womanizing had gotten worse. After he won that Senate seat, due in large part to Joan, Ted walked into a royal dinner in Belgium with a sex worker on his arm. They were both drunk, just completely hammered, and Ted made a terrible spectacle, making out with this woman on an antique sofa that one of them, in their total inebriation, urinated on. Joan was so mortified that back home in America she wrote a note to the party's hosts, apologizing for her husband. The humiliation knows no bounds. Her health began to suffer. Yeah. She needed an appendectomy and then a tonsillectomy, operations that most people have as children. She was always fighting some kind of a cold or a sore throat. She began experiencing such agonizing stomach pains that her doctors ordered exploratory surgery. They found nothing. Maybe she was crazy, like Teddy said. Or maybe she's married to somebody who shows up at a party in Belgium with a sex worker and urinates all over the place. Then came the plane crash. It was only about 7 months after Jack's assassination, and Ted had been flying from D.C. to Springfield, Massachusetts, where he would be named the Democratic nominee for the United States Senate. The plane was an Aero Commander, a small twin engine that had taken off in terrible weather with poor visibility. I'll just say that if you're a Kennedy, you might just not need to get into some planes. You're going to need to take a car, a bus, find some train going the way you need to go, a boat. If I was a Kennedy, I'd never set foot in a plane. They're all dying in planes. All of them. Every time you turn around. I mean, and if I found out that I was on a plane with a Kennedy, deboarding. I mean, I'm joking. Obviously, there's not really a curse. These people live wild lives. That's why they're dying like this. But it is uncanny how many of these people have died in plane crashes. And Ted, of course, didn't die, but geez, he's lucky he didn't. Just after midnight on June 20th, 1964, Joan Kennedy was resting her eyes and waiting for Ted to arrive when there was a knock at the door. It was Jack Crimmins, one of the Kennedy family chauffeurs. "There's been an accident," Crimmins said. Joan didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She just dressed quickly and had Crimmins drive her to the hospital. She probably was hoping against hope that the accident had gone in her favor. On the way, Joan tried to talk herself down. "Sometimes they say a plane has crashed when it's landed, don't they?" she asked. Or they say there's been a crash when only something minor's happened, like maybe a tire blew out or it skidded on the runway. Sometimes they say it's bad when it might not even be bad." It was bad. The plane had crashed into an apple orchard in Massachusetts. Ted had been dragged from the wreckage by a fellow passenger, Senator Birch Bay, who got Ted out before his own wife. If that marriage was having problems, that would have been the end of it. Can you imagine you're in a plane crash and your husband pulls out the other guy, the Kennedy, and then leaves you in the burning wreckage? I mean, you would never get past that. Even if you were able to remain married, every time you had an argument, it would all go back to, remember that time you left me in the burning wreckage and you pulled Ted Kennedy out instead of me, your own wife? A good Samaritan came upon the site and took the Bays to his house, leaving a gravely injured Ted on the ground, paralyzed from the waist down, close to the plane. The Samaritan, a regular guy named Robert Shower, called the police and fire departments, grabbed blankets and water, and hurried back to the crash site to wait with Ted until the ambulance came. That random act of kindness saved Ted's life. Inside the plane, the pilot and one of Ted's aides were dead. Ted's back was broken, as were 2 ribs. He had a collapsed lung, and by the time the rescue crews got Ted to the hospital, he had no pulse. A team from Walter Reed Army Hospital Center was flying up. Whoa. I don't think I remembered that this crash had been so bad. I've read this book, but I don't remember all that. His back was broken? 2 ribs? A collapsed lung? Good night. Anyway, once she got to the emergency room in Northampton, Joan realized that her husband might not make it. Her aides helped secure for her a room next to Ted so that she could stay the night. He'd been revived in the field, and here she was with him in the emergency room. Ted was under an oxygen tent getting a blood transfusion. It was unclear if he would live through the night. Joan kept calm. She kept the aides who had taken her to the hospital calm. "I spoke to him and he talked to me," Joan said. "He told me he'll be all right." She had to believe it. By Sunday, Ted was stable enough for surgery, a 6-hour spinal operation that, if successful, would save him from life as a paraplegic. Ted's recovery, his doctors told Joan, would take anywhere from 6 months to a year. Joan was stronger than the Kennedys gave her credit for, stronger than maybe even she had known. The Joan Kennedy, so devastated by Jack's death that she hadn't been able to get out of bed for days, now became a warrior. When Ted's campaign advisors came begging to Joan, asking her to stump for him even though she hated retail politics, Joan, who had an enormous public sympathy, the second beautiful young Kennedy wife and mother, endured unthinkable tragedy. She did not think twice. "Of course I will," Joan said. No debate, no self-doubt, no question at all. All of their marital problems were suddenly minimized. Ted had lived. He wasn't going to survive for nothing. A war room was set up in Ted's spacious suite in rehab. Joan, who now had 3 small children at home, having given birth to Teddy Jr. in 1961, arrived every morning, having risen early for an hour-plus drive, and would meet with Ted as he lay strapped face down in an orthopedic bed. She would sit with him as if nothing had changed, holding her sheaf of papers and speeches, her itineraries and talking points. She brought him newspapers and books and laughed when he joked that he was rotated like a rotisserie chicken to prevent fluid from building up in his lungs. She vetted the list of people who wanted to see her husband. Then she would have a quick bite and head out at noon for the first of her day-long campaign stops. 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, cities and towns, meet and greets and polka dancing and fielding questions from reporters about Ted, lying about how great he was doing and how upbeat his spirits were and how strong their marriage was. It was the only time she felt bad about herself, having to lie like that, knowing that all those reporters knew about Ted's womanizing but were too polite to ever mention it. Before she had started stumping in earnest, President Johnson called. "I hear you're going out there on the trail," he said. "It's hard work, you know. Sure you can handle it?" "I must do it," Joan replied. "I know I can. It's my responsibility." "It is," the president said. "So you go on out there and be a good little girl and you do a good job." That guy is the worst. The way he just infantilizes women whenever he interacts with them. I know it's a different time, it's a different age, but I think we can all agree that President Johnson just had a way about him that just grates on you. You go out there and be a good little girl. Okay, thanks for letting me know the obvious. Joan didn't do a good job. She did a great one. At heart, Joan was an introvert. And, as it turned out, these events and exchanges, the sheer number of people who wanted to touch her or talk to her, even for a moment, took something from her. She didn't thrive on it as Teddy did. He really got something out of it. It fed him. But Joan ended each day feeling depleted. She found herself drinking more frequently. She began focusing on all the little things she got wrong, names or places, and lived in fear of getting up to deliver her stump speech and forgetting it all. Ted's team told her not to worry. She was doing better than anyone expected. She was going to win this for Teddy. She was a natural, even if she didn't believe it. But nothing could get Joan out of her doom spiral, because the one person who mattered didn't seem to care. Sure, Ted put on a good show when others were around, but even then he found a way to put her down. "You have an opportunity to do something here, Jonesy," he'd say, "so do it, for yourself." He said this to her in front of a bunch of volunteers, strangers. It was mortifying. She didn't need her husband to direct her, to castigate her for a lack of ambition. She wasn't trying to prove something to herself. This wasn't some est course in self-actualization. She was working her ass off trying to win her reckless husband, injured so badly because he decided it was a great idea to stand up and look at the pilot's controls as the plane was going down. On the way to accept the nomination to run for a Senate seat his father had bought, a seat that, if Ted had any real work ethic or sense of responsibility, should be his without her help, without her extremely hard work, which was costing her time with their small children. God, he was reckless. Years before, flying with Jack in another small plane, Ted had taken the controls and insisted on landing the plane in Vegas. Did Ted have a pilot's license? No. Did Ted have any earthly idea how to fly a plane? Of course not. Were they ferrying precious cargo, the future president of the United States, months from victory? They sure were. Bobby was the only Kennedy man who didn't seem to have a death wish. He, at least, seemed to think about his children. But Ted was like a big baby, all id. He wanted what he wanted when he wanted it, and everyone else could clean up the mess. Without Joan's day in and day out tireless, unglamorous help, he had no shot. But the better she performed for Ted, the higher he pulled, and the more distant and resentful he became. Of course he's distant and resentful, because he knows he couldn't do it without her. That's why he has to put her down. That's why he's got to act like what all her efforts are just something that she's kind of doing as a side hobby because she's so lame and unmotivated that, lucky her, she's finally getting an opportunity to get up off her ass. He's got to put her down because he feels bad, because he feels like, yeah, if it weren't for her, I would never be able to do this on my own. So yes, of course he's becoming distant. When he did win, he won in a landslide, getting 75% of the vote, a record victory in Massachusetts. The Kennedys took note. "Congratulations," Jackie wrote to Joan, "and a job well done. How wonderful. I hope this shows you how much you can accomplish. I'm so excited for you." Ethel called and lavished Joan, whose looks and style she loved taking down a peg, with fulsome praise. "The whole family is proud of you," Ethel said. "What a wonderful job you did." Joan even heard that Bobby told Ted that his re-election was due to her. Her mother-in-law sent 2 bouquets of red roses in congratulations and gratitude. The only one who never said a thing, not so much as thank you, was Ted. Well, we know why, because Ted's jealous. Ted feels bad about himself. Ted wishes he didn't need that much help to get through his own job, but he does. He felt that if he said thank you, that would have meant that he was admitting out loud he had needed the help. And he doesn't want to admit that, so of course he skipped thank you. In July of 1969, Joan was on a doctor-ordered bed rest, pregnant and at risk of miscarrying for the 3rd time. She heard an influx of staffers downstairs, muffled voices, her husband among them. He'd been away for the weekend, leaving Joan alone on the Cape with their 2 small children. She wanted to go downstairs and ask all these people, the ever-present sycophants, aides, lawyers, and hangers-on, to leave. But someone had been dispatched to Joan's bedroom and told her to stay where she was. Something was wrong. Joan reached over to her bedside table and picked up the phone. Her husband was on the line, talking to another woman. Helga, the girlfriend. One of them anyway. What they were talking about Joan didn't know, but clearly Helga was fluent in Ted's provocations. He was in a panic, talking about a car accident he'd been in on the vineyard. Something about leaving the scene and blacking out and wondering what he should do. Whatever this was, Joan knew it would be her problem too. She would be called upon to save him yet again. In the 11 years since they had been married, she had become not so much a wife as a professional reputation defender, her warmth and beauty a shield for Ted to hide behind. After all, the thinking went, if a woman as good as Joan loved and stood by Ted Kennedy, how bad could he be? The answer, as those on the inside knew, was simple. Ted was worse than anyone could imagine. Weeks after Mary Jo Kopechne's death, Ted had jetted off to Paris, where his sister Eunice and her husband Sarge were promoting the Special Olympics. It was an initiative for physically and mentally challenged children, founded by Eunice in tribute to Rosemary. Joan refused to go. She'd suffered enough by then and was suffering still. Ted could have used that trip to begin rehabilitating his image, but no. Word got back that Ted had been frequently wandering around the ambassador's residence where he was staying, drunk and naked. We're here for the disabled children, Ted. Are you one of them? Where are your clothes? The American doctor Herbert Kramer was also there. It was Kramer who had written the mission statement for the Special Olympics. Let me win, but if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. Words a man in Ted's predicament might have taken to heart. Kramer had gone for a walk with another guest, an insightful economist, and the two spoke of Ted's latest crisis. What Teddy ought to do, Kramer said, is to resign from the Senate and take 2 years, to do some good work to redeem himself, to suggest that night at Chappaquiddick had been an aberration. The economist blanched. You gotta be kidding, he replied. Ted would never sacrifice his Senate seat. Ever. This isn't a moral animal. This is a political animal. And it was that same political animal who persuaded Joan to get up out of the doctor-ordered bed rest and accompany him to Mary Joan's funeral. And so she was by his side as he wore his stupid neck brace he didn't need, as he insisted on sitting on the front pew and making a show of struggling to kneel. I thought the neck brace was bad. I thought this was ridiculous. But then for him to act like he just can't get down to kneel in the service, but he's going to be brave in the attempt. Get out of town with that. Ted is like, I have to keep remembering he was once a child. He was once a child, a needy child, and his parents didn't care. Okay, so these are where the seeds of stupidity were planted. But he has watered these seeds, lo these many years. There he is, trying his hardest to call all the attention to his neck brace and the fact he can't kneel and it's so hard. And, imagine his pain at being in the accident in Chappaquiddick at the funeral of the person who he abandoned to die in 3 feet of water. You guys, how is it that she couldn't get out of that car? Had something happened to her beforehand? Maybe she got bashed up in the accident, it's like smacked her head or something. I don't know. But if he could get out, why could she not get out? What, she was smaller than him and yet he managed to find an exit. Could she not have also managed? I'm not, don't hear me blaming her for dying in 3 feet of water. I'm just saying, it makes you wonder, why was she incapacitated to that extent? I know she was in the back seat and the car had been crushed down. So maybe there really wasn't a way for her to wiggle out. I don't know. But it's strange. Anyway, back to the story that we're on now. We're not talking about Chappaquiddick. Let's see. Oh, okay, so he's struggling to kneel. He's making a big show of it. It was the political animal who decided to announce Joan's pregnancy on July 25th, just before addressing the nation that night after Mary Jo's death. And 2 days after the accident, Ted had pressured Joan into calling Mary Jo's parents. Ted can't manage it, but let me go and get Ethel to do it, and I'm going to go get Joan to do it. Is he just going to spend his whole life hiding behind the skirts of a bunch of women? Joan wasn't cynical in the least. She didn't know what to do. A young woman's death had been caused by her husband, yet all these men in suits, all these Kennedy women too, were concerned with one thing: saving Ted's career. The career is over, or it should have been. They were such sanctimonious Catholics, such hypocrites. Jackie and Ethel and Rose, all of them impervious to shame, ruthless. Didn't matter that Joan was really hurting, as much for Mary Jo, and for her and Ted's children as for herself. They were all determined to get Ted, lazy, drunk, horny, feckless, remorseless Ted, into the White House. Joan sat at the dining table downstairs. A rotary phone was placed in front of her. Ted was being nice to Joan now, solicitous. He and his aides were talking to her as if she were dumb rather than in shock. We need you to pull this off, they said. If the Kopechnes like you, they'll go easier on Ted. They won't push for criminal charges. They won't sue. They won't bankrupt you and your young family. You've got to do this. You've got to go to bat for Ted. It's on you. If Ted fails with the Kopechnes, it'll ultimately be your fault because you wouldn't make the phone call. Joan knew better. None of them cared about Mary Jo Chappaquiddick. She was just yet another inconvenient woman to be managed and disposed of. A number was dialed. Mary Jo's mother picked up. Joan had to say something. "Hello, Mrs. Chappaquiddick," Joan said. "This is Joan Kennedy, Ted's wife." Mary Jo's mother said hello back. She did not sound angry. This was humbling. "We are so sorry about what happened," Joan said. "The whole Kennedy family. We've had tragedy ourselves, and so we empathize with you, and we are so sorry." Mary Jo's mother was weeping softly. Joan looked up. The men in the suits were exalted. Ted looked relieved. Happy, almost. 1 month later, 6 days before the inquest into Mary Jo's death, Joan miscarried. This would have been her 4th child, one she badly wanted. Ted had been away camping with 2 of their children and John Jr. It was Ethel who had taken Joan to the emergency room. Ted rushed back, but he was the last person she wanted to see. And that was it for her. That was the moment Joan gave up. Chappaquiddick, Mary Jo's funeral, the phone call to Mrs. Chappaquiddick, the inquest. All of it had contributed to her miscarriage. Ted made her lose her baby. That is when she truly became, as she later would say, an alcoholic. That is when she became the object of Ted's utter scorn. At his most vile, after coming home late and gorging on leftovers, that's how Joan knew he'd been with other women, because Ted was always ravenously hungry after sex, just a bottomless pit of gluttony. Ted would dismiss Joan as a drunk, a terrible mother who slept all day. Weak! He had a favorite insult. "Just call McLean," he'd say, knowing that her own mother had been institutionalized. "Put Joan in a cab." Ted, of course, held on to his Senate seat after leaving Mary Jo in that car. How? Well, he leaned heavily on his wife and his 3 dead brothers and his role as paterfamilias for all the newly fatherless Kennedy children, and all was forgiven. Joan, on the other hand, her life was becoming tabloid fodder now, something for bored housewives to consume as they waited in the grocery store checkout line. The Joan Kennedy story, from dream to nightmare. Unlike so many other headlines about her, this one at least was true. November would come to hold terrible new memories for Joan, too. It was early that month, in 1973, when her youngest son, then 12-year-old Teddy Jr., sweet, shy, obedient Teddy, complained of pain in his right leg, the lower part, where a raised bruise had formed. Doctors quickly determined that Teddy had a rare form of cancer called chondrosarcoma. His was an extremely malignant tumor at risk of metastasizing quickly. The only option, Joan and Ted were told, was to amputate the leg above the knee, immediately. 12-year-old child, you're told you have to amputate his leg immediately. Like, ugh! Like the punch to the gut that would be. So scary already to hear the word cancer related to your child, and then to find out that immediately his leg has to be cut off. I mean, I would just I would just completely mentally shut down if I got this news about my child. Compound that news with the entire life she's had with Ted. I mean, it's enough to just make you want to weep for her humanity, it's like, can I not catch a break in this family? All these family members dying, being assassinated. Then my husband is just every day running our marriage into the ground. Then he kills somebody. Then he abandons that person. It's on my shoulders to fix it. I've had miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage. I'm constantly dumped on by all these people. I'm stressed out continually because his career is on my shoulders, somehow not on his shoulders as he runs through the world. And now I got to cut my kid's leg off. Early on the morning of November 18th, days before the 10th anniversary of Jack's assassination, Teddy Jr. underwent a 4-hour surgery at Georgetown University Hospital. When he awoke in his hospital room, Joan was there with Ted, putting on a happy, united front and making sure their boy knew he was going to be okay. For Joan, this was yet another crisis that soldered her to her husband's side. Before their son's diagnosis, she and Ted had been on the verge of separation. Joan had spent the summer traveling in Europe with their daughter, Kara. Now, there was no way they could divorce. She would look like a terrible mother, and Ted's eventual run for president would be compromised. Before the accident that killed Mary Jo, Joan had been seeing 2 psychiatrists, one on Tuesdays, and one on Wednesdays as a kind of insurance. She always wanted to know what one thought of the other's assessments. She'd felt trapped with Ted and was looking for a way out. But as one friend observed, Mary Jo's death further ensnared her in the marriage. Afterward, her friend said, she was the only ally Ted Kennedy had. He needed her desperately, and she knew it, and rose to the occasion. The unintended consequence for Joan? She was now a Kennedy for life. Oh, what a stab. What a crisis. Okay, so that's the end of part 2, and then next time we come together, we'll do part 3 of the Joan story, and we'll kind of find out, like, what exactly does her total fall from grace look like, and then what happens when she and Ted end up finally getting that divorce, and then what does her life look like after. It's a whole thing. So that's the next part of the Joan story. You know what shocks me the most about the Kennedys is their ease in using people. It's really, really demonic. Like, it's probably one of the darker parts about who they were. Just their ease and just using up the lives around them for their own personal gain. And constantly clapping themselves on the back like, look at us, we are ruling the world. But you're ruling the world at the expense of all the people who you've trampled. You climb the heights on corpses. You know, it's just shocking to me that these people call themselves Catholics and Christians. And it's like, okay, well, I'm really proud of you for knowing how to say, you know, Our Father, and good for you for being able to, you know, go through that rosary, you know, a couple times in your life. But are you a Catholic? Do you know the Lord? I mean, do you understand right and wrong? I don't know. You know, it's just, hypocrites are some of the most grating individuals in life because they're constantly gaslighting you because they're like, yes, I know all the right answers. And they can say all the right answers. They could probably tell you all the right things to say. But few things are as gross as religious people who use God's name in vain. Second only to politicians who are constantly lying to you and you know they're lying to you. You combine those two atrocious people and you get the Kennedys. And that's why I think that they leave such a bad taste in our mouth, because they are two halves of the worst things. Fake religious people and politicians. Kennedys. That's what we got. All right. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the comments. Bye.